All right, let's take a look at this really quick. This is absolutely crazy, but let's break it down. So I've been absolutely shocked lately at the number of Europeans who had seemed to believe that they would have any sort of chance against the U.S. military if conflict arose over Greenland. It's just an unprecedented level of delusion. Interesting that we think Europeans are delusional when the conflict over Greenland wasn't even on anybody's radar 2 years ago, as far as I know, unless there were secret plans for it in the work at that time. So this is like one of those hypothetical scenarios that you're suddenly faced with and you're supposed to make a decision about it, but it's not even realistic. You've never thought about it before because it's just not something that's supposed to happen at all. So I don't know if Europeans are the ones we should be criticizing here, but let's read on and see what she has to say. One, America has bases all over Europe. Europeans, the American military wouldn't even need to invade. It is already inside you. Why is this so threatening? Those bases are there because that was a strategic alliance, right? Those bases were put there based on a relationship of trust between those countries, between the U.S. and those European countries who said, hey, it's in our mutual best interest to have American bases spread around. They're hosted there, right? This is not like we had a conflict with these countries, so we forced them to allow us to put bases in their country. These were mutual agreements that both countries came to with respect for each other. So why is this even a statement that would be used as a threat? Two, Europe's military spending, all countries together, still does not compare to America's. It's not even close. The resources, the manpower the American military has, Europe would be so crushed, or would be crushed so immediately that any fighting could barely be called a war. We just heard a bunch of that rhetoric with Venezuela. It's not a war. It was too quick to be a war. But let's look at this here. Now, Europe's military spending is smaller than that of the U.S. It looks like a little bit less than 1/3. It might be easier to look at this and say it's probably about 1/3. It's probably a little bit less because of the rounded edge there. But it's probably greater than 1/4. And then Canada is shown as part of the U.S., which it wouldn't be in this conflict, this hypothetical conflict that should not happen. So military spending, I mean, it's not like it's a drop against an ocean. It's like a small army against a larger army. And we know that historically that is not the determining factor in a lot of conflicts. So that statement seems a little bit crazy already. But again, the bigger issue is, why are we using words like Europe would be crushed so immediately? Are we really talking about this as if this is something that's going to happen? As if there's going to be a war or an intention of a war between the U.S. and Europe? 3, the EU is essentially already in a Cold War with Russia. By the way, I haven't read these, so I'm reading through them for the first time. All I really looked at was this little graph here. So anyways, 3, the EU is essentially already in a Cold War with Russia. Do Europeans really think it would be a good idea to divert military resources to Greenland, of all places, while the war rages on in Ukraine? Again, this sounds like why is this a talking point? Because taking Greenland, as much as I can't believe I'm even saying those words, because again, it wasn't on my radar 2 years ago, even 1 year ago, but taking Greenland should be something that's done based on whether or not it's right? It's a little bit crazy to even, to voice the possibility like, well, let's think about this, let's consider this. But if we are going to consider it, it should be like, is this a good idea? What is good about this? What's right about it? What's important about it? Why are we doing this? Not, maybe we can get away with it while Europe is focused on spending its resources against Russia. Especially since the whole stated point of taking Greenland is to protect the U.S. from Russia. So this question, like the first two questions, could be turned around back on America so easily. Why do we think it's a good idea to spend our military resources on Greenland, with asterisks on both sides of it, of all places, while there's a very real conflict going on with Russia? And do we want to get out of that conflict? Do we want to not spend our resources on that conflict? If the answer for you is yes, I'm completely fine with that. I don't think there's an obvious position, an obvious moral position that says America needs to be spending its resources supporting this war against Russia, or this war between Russia and Ukraine. However, are we really going to spend our resources on Greenland as a defensive mechanism against Russia when we are making the decision not to support the conflict that is currently already going on against Russia? Right? Why would we not join the effort that's already taking place, lead that effort, whatever, be America in that effort, do it our way because that's what America does, and that's fine. But why would we focus on Greenland instead of that? Especially because that is opposed to what the other countries who are supposedly on the same side as us, who supposedly also have Russia as an enemy along with us, we're undermining them. We're saying we're creating this artificial conflict for them of now they have to decide whether they're going to divert resources or not. In other words, we're weakening them in their efforts. So if we don't want to have any part of it, that's totally fine. Let's not have a part of it. But why would we do something that would be counterproductive to the effort that's currently going on against the country that we say is our enemy, that we want to position ourselves well against by the very act of taking Greenland, supposedly? Cool. 4, the international community would all but certainly bow to American interest. There is a reason why America spends all the money it does on foreign aid and why it tolerates unequal trade partnerships. But we're not doing that anymore, right? We've already taken action about those things, and maybe it was good action to take to stop some of that aid, as heartbreaking as it is to know that there were people whose lives were being saved or supported by that aid, and there probably is an actual death toll around removing that aid. The accusations are that the aid was handled irresponsibly, it was mismanaged, there was a lot of corruption, and it needed to go or be reworked. Possibly it needed to be scrapped altogether. And while I'm heartbroken for anybody, any human being who suffered as a result of that decision, I think that it is fair to say there's a real reason for seeing it the way that the people saw it who took it away, who said we're not doing this anymore. However, if we're not doing that anymore, then we're not going to also say that we have this posture in the world as a result of something we're not doing anymore. And unequal trade partnerships, we're also doing away with that, which is a good thing. We should not be in unequal trade partnerships. I don't think it benefits either country in the long run. That's easier for me to say than talking about aid. That's kind of an easy stance for me to have. I don't think that unequal, unfair arrangements are good in the long run. It's not even good for whoever it seems to benefit. However, now that we are aggressively trying to remove that, we can't lean on it anymore. And we can't expect the whole world to be like, oh, America, they do so much, they send so much aid, and they tolerate trade partnerships that benefit us more than them. The world's not going to look at us like that, because that's not the attitude that we have currently, and it doesn't matter if it was the attitude that we had 10 years ago. I'm not sure it even was, but even if it was, it doesn't matter if it's not what we're doing now. So if push came to shove, there is practically 0% chance that the rest of the world would involve itself in a US-EU conflict at the risk of incurring American sanctions, tariffs, austerity, or worse. In other words, her point is we're going to bully our way into whatever we want, right? Why would anybody stand against this action at the risk of losing American benefits, or it sounds towards the end here like at the risk of gaining American consequences. Consequences for what? For saying that we shouldn't take Greenland? Because that's a completely sane position to hold. Why should there be consequences for that? What's America going to do to people or countries who don't agree? Again, she left it very open-ended with this, or worse. Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly don't want a war with Europe. I hate war. Plus, Europe would be better off saving its money to pay up for all the immigrants they're importing. Bunch of unrelated BS, but I simply wanted to point out how ridiculous all the posturing from the likes of Emmanuel Macron is. I hate war. Okay, plus Europe would be better off saving its money. So she's just kind of deflecting again, trying to make this about Europe. Europe didn't initiate any of this. Anything coming from Europe is a response. So I'm not sure how critical we can or should or she should be towards Europe, saying what Europe would be better off doing, when in reality this isn't coming from Europe. So again, it's just kind of flipping the script and making, that accusation, making the bulk of the accusations towards the victim here, towards the group of people who are suddenly caught up in this conflict they never asked for, never expected, and all of a sudden we're lecturing them about what they should be doing, instead of having an honest look at what the U.S. is doing and whether it makes any sense. 100% of everything she said so far is about redirecting any opinion that we might have towards Europe. She hasn't mentioned at any point whether this is taking Greenland in the first place is a good idea on the part of the U.S. It's all about, can we get away with it? It's all about how would Europe fare in a war against the U.S. It's not about, is this a good idea? I'll get to that in a second. However, I will note that it's refreshing in one sense to see any semblance of nationalism from the usually self-flagellating EU neoliberals. It's just a shame it's driven by hopped-up anti-Americanism. Well, what else is it going to be driven by? All right, let's go down here. Look at that. You see it. It's pretty clear. Here's what I said. The defense spending by European countries in this visual looks like between 1/4 and 1/3 of all defense spending, with the U.S. being the remainder. The move to take Greenland is supposedly about defense against Russia, or I should say maybe just being in a good position for any potential conflict with Russia. But it puts us at odds with European countries by and large. Some people are saying, well, Poland might support it. Poland's like 8% of the European GDP. It's not significant. And by and large, it puts us in a position of conflict with European countries. So the idea is that by losing international respect, making enemies of our former allies, losing the 1/3 contribution of European countries, that's just a monetary contribution, which probably in total, and this is probably worth noting, which in total have less, this is not probably, this is definitely, they have less than 1/3 of the landmass of the U.S. combined. So that means that their contribution relative to their size is greater than that of the U.S. relative to its size. The Europe is tiny, right? All of Europe could probably fit inside of Texas. So the fact that their total contribution is even this significant on the chart means that as a whole, they're contributing more relative to their size. Anyways, you get it. And fragmenting the alliance of nations that mutually see Russia. This is a big one. The others are big ones too, actually. Fragmenting the alliance of nations that mutually see Russia as an enemy will somehow be safer afterwards. right? So I'm doing what she did not do ever in this whole long thing, and ask whether it's a good idea for the United States to try to take Greenland. She's trying to deflect, make it about Europe, make it about criticizing Europe, point out that they're a bunch of neoliberals, self-flagellating specifically, or supposedly. Let's turn your attention to everything that is, quote, bad, supposedly bad about Europe, so that you will forget to ask the question, well, what about the U.S.? What about this decision that the U.S. is seemingly trying to make? Let's just not think about that at all. Let's think about Europe only. Because if we think about this with any degree of logic and intelligence, we're going to see it's a bad idea. And there's two main things here. I kind of spread it out a little bit, but there's two main things. One is making enemies of our allies, and the other one is related. It's fragmenting the power of the nations that oppose Russia. We're going to do something that is directly opposed and has the attitude and has the appearance and has the sense of being opposed to all of our allies for the supposed best interest of the United States. How is losing this relatively large chunk of military spending, of military power, from countries that up until this point would have taken the same side as the U.S. in any conflict, are we really going to fragment that out? You look at the Republican Party and how it has begun to fragment, and how there's so much disagreement within the party, and it's kind of eating itself from the inside. And it's like that didn't happen coincidentally, and it's no coincidence that that's the party that is proposing doing this. I don't feel bad for the Republican Party for falling apart and for eating itself from the inside when they are doing that themselves through this type of decision making, through this type of logic or lack thereof. So, but I do feel bad for the victims of that. I feel bad for the honest Republicans, the ones who have stood up and are standing up and will continue to stand up for some really basic conservative beliefs that they genuinely hold, that don't have anything to do with any of this, that people who just want to see conservative fiscal policies, conservative decision making, and even conservative social priorities. All that's fine if it's genuine, if it's consistent, if it's honest, if there's nothing hiding beneath the surface of any of it. That's all just fine. And I do feel bad for those Republicans, including, Thomas Massie at the forefront, who are not the ones fragmenting the party. They're the ones who've been blamed for it. They have, by the supposed Republicans, I don't think it's even fair to call them Republicans, but by the supposed Republicans who are in power, Donald Trump and those around him, they're blaming Thomas Massie. Why don't you just support everything we do? Because he has integrity. Because he is intelligent. Because he trusts his own eyes and ears when he sees that the things you're doing aren't consistent with the party's values, and instead of just going along with it, he says so, right? Along with other Republicans who have had the integrity and backbone to say, this isn't what we stand for, here's what we do stand for, this is what the party has stood for and has tried to stand for a long time, and we're just being consistent with that. And you're the ones putting yourselves at odds with that. We're just the ones pointing it out. I feel bad for them, and I feel bad for the world, including the U.S., the U.S. citizens who will be affected by this, European citizens who will be affected by this, everyday normal people all over the world who will be affected by this bullshit, because we can type of attitude. And the thought that losing this cohesiveness between countries that mutually understand that Russia and what Russia stands for, and what not Russia, not the normal everyday people of Russia, but what the Russian government stands for, is not freedom. It's not what we want in the world. And we're gonna make an attempt at fragmenting that, and fragmenting the cohesiveness of the countries that may have differences. We may see things differently than European countries. I'm sure glad I was born in and live in the U.S. I like the U.S. a lot. I would rather live here than in any European country. And I say that confidently and proudly because it's true. And at the same time, I don't want to see my country make bad, stupid, harmful decisions that harm us and harm others around the world just because I like this country. In fact, because I like this country, I don't want to see us make those types of decisions. I don't want to see the leaders of the country make those types of decisions and the rest of us just not notice or say how bad they are or stand up to them at all. So that's my take. I think I've said everything I could say in one form or another. Thanks for watching.